Tonight, you are not stepping into a battlefield, and you are not about to witness the signing of a treaty beneath a chandelier bright enough to blind a king. Tonight, you are entering something quieter than that, and in its own way, more difficult to escape. You are about to live through an ordinary Victorian day as a woman, which means that from the moment your eyes open, almost every comfort must negotiate with duty before it is allowed to exist. The air itself feels supervised. Your posture is supervised. Your appetite is supervised. Your thoughts are not entirely safe either, because even the private corners of the day are shaped by expectation long before anyone says a word. So let the room around you soften for a while. Let the century drift to the edges. You do not need to remember dates or memorize names tonight. You do not need to strain at facts. You only need to follow the hush of this long old house and the women moving through it. You only need to notice the textures, the faint coal smell that never quite leaves the curtains, the crisp touch of linen cooled overnight, the little click of a boot heel on polished wood, the heavy patience of staircases climbed too many times in a day, the scrape of a brush through hair, the whisper of thread through cloth, the soft clink of teacups in rooms where politeness has become a kind of weather. And because this is a history for sleep, you are safe all the while. You are only listening. You are only drifting through a world of starch and soot and candlelight, where the grandest drama often hides inside the quietest gesture. A woman smoothing her skirt before entering breakfast. A servant pausing for one breath beside a kitchen door. A lady lowering her eyes at exactly the moment her opinion threatens to show. A laundress wringing out another length of wet cotton, while the day outside changes color and no one thanks her for it. A young wife sitting with a book open in her lap, not so much reading as performing the shape of serenity. The Victorian century loved to praise women for being gentle, graceful, composed, and naturally domestic, as though all of that rose from the female soul like perfume from a rose. But if you stay here long enough, if you move from dawn to noon and noon to dusk, you begin to see the machinery beneath the lace. You begin to notice how much labor is required to create the appearance of ease, how much stillness is trained into a body, how many hours are spent making life look effortless for others. That is the soft, strange promise of tonight's story. Nothing explosive, nothing shouted, only a day, only the long, ordinary day. Only the secret that ordinary life can contain a whole architecture of pressure. So settle gently, let your breathing remain your own, because the women we are about to follow are not always granted that simple luxury. Let your shoulders unclench, because many of theirs do not. Let the day begin in darkness, before the household is fully awake, in a room where the fire has thinned to ash and the morning is colder than mercy. You wake before the sun has decided what sort of day it wants to be. The curtains hold a dim gray light behind them, the kind that tells you dawn is present somewhere, though not yet generous. The fire in the grate has collapsed into a soft red memory. Your room smells faintly of lavender water, cooled brick, dust on drapery, and the long companionship of soot that clings to every respectable interior, whether anyone admits it or not. When you exhale, the air briefly clouds before your face. That alone is enough to remind you there will be no luxurious delay this morning. Warmth in this world does not arrive on command. Someone must carry it. Someone must coax it from coals. Someone must begin working before you have properly opened your eyes. For one small moment, still half wrapped in sleep, you lie very still and enjoy the fact of not yet being arranged. No one can see you. No one can comment on your color or your manners or the line of your shoulders or whether you appear sufficiently lively. No one can tell whether your expression is becoming. You are simply a body in blankets, heavy with sleep, warm at the center, cool at the edges, not yet translated into a daughter, wife, sister, mistress, ornament, manager, or example. It is one of the freest moments of the day, and it lasts almost no time at all. Somewhere below stairs, a door opens and closes, Iron shifts on iron. A scuttle is set down. Water is poured. The hidden engine of the house has started. In a few minutes, there will be a tap, discreet and practiced, and your private body will be invited to become public again. If you belong to a comfortable household, a maid enters with a basin and folded cloths, and the expression of someone who has already been awake long enough to resent light itself. She does not look around the room as a visitor would. She knows what belongs where. She places the water, parts the curtains, checks the fire, and lays out the first quiet instruments of transformation. Shift, stockings, stays, petticoat, dress, slippers, brush, pins. There is a tenderness to routines learned by repetition, but not always warm. You wash in water that has been carried up for you and is never quite as warm as your skin hoped it might be. You dry quickly because the chill of the room insists upon efficiency. Your maid lifts yesterday's discarded ribbons, shakes out a skirt, adjusts the position of a chair without being asked. If she is kind silently. If she is tired silently. Women in this century become experts at saving their truest tone for rooms with no witnesses. Then the corset arrives, and with it, the first serious negotiation between your body and the day. You stand in your shift and place a hand on the bedpost or the mantle, not from fragility, but from prudence. The laces begin to draw, not brutally, not in the lurid way later centuries enjoy imagining, but firmly enough that your breathing learns, once more, that it must proceed with caution. Respectability does not always demand pain. It often demands constraint, and constraint can be more exhausting because it lasts longer. The stays teach your ribs the same lesson every morning. Take up less room, announce less appetite, move with more intention than comfort would naturally choose. The house, meanwhile, is still only half awake. Floors above and below hold different versions of the same beginning. In one room, a woman is being laced into shape. In another, a girl is pulling on a dress with cold fingers before hurrying down to light fires she will not sit beside. One woman's day begins with being arranged. Another woman's day begins with arranging the conditions in which others may appear graceful. The whole household depends upon this division, and the day has barely started. Now, step into the same dawn from a narrower bed in a smaller room, and the century changes texture at once. The ceiling slopes low. The blanket is thin. Frost has worked itself into the corner of the window, and the washstand holds a pitcher that feels like stone when you touch it. This time there is no discreet knock because no one comes to help you into the morning. You are the help. You rise quickly because to lie still is to lose time, and time below stairs can become accusation by breakfast if you spend it carelessly at dawn. You pull on stockings donned more than once, tie your apron, button what can still be buttoned, and pin back your hair with fingers too stiff to do the job neatly. You do not begin by washing for freshness. You begin by carrying coal first, or perhaps kindling, then ashes, then water. The staircases are colder than the bedrooms above, and more honest about it. The house in the dark belongs to servants and firelight, and the sound of metal meeting brick. You crouch at one grate, and then another, blowing life into embers, until your face stings with heat, while your back remains chill. Soon bells will ring from upstairs. Soon the cook will want trays moved. Soon the mistress will need hot water. Soon the children will wake. The morning is a string, pulled tight from one end of the house to the other, and you are expected to move along it without tangling anything. Below stairs, smells arrive earlier and more directly. Coal smoke, damp stone, yesterday's broth reheated, soap, metal, bread, wet wool, steaming near the kitchen range. Above stairs, scents are edited by curtains and carpets and distance. Below stairs, labor has its own atmosphere, and everyone wears it. The cook is already red-cheeked and formidable in the changing light. A kitchen maid peels, sweeps, wipes, fetches. Someone yawns and hides it in her sleeve. Someone else coughs because the scullery was cold in the night. If there is kindness here, It often comes in fragments. Half a joke, a crust set aside, a warning whispered before the housekeeper appears. You might think that because servants move so quickly, they do not notice much. In truth, they notice everything. Which bedroom rang first, which door stayed shut too late, which pair of boots is muddier than it ought to be, which tray returned untouched, which mistress is inclined to thank, and which one is inclined to inspect. Servants live inside the pulse of the house more intimately than anyone who owns it. They feel its moods in the stair rails, in the tempo of footsteps, in whether the breakfast tea is requested with quiet urgency or sharp impatience. The day above stairs may be performed, the day below stairs is felt in the bones. And yet, there is something almost tender about this hour before the whole building becomes social. Fires lift, kettles hiss, glass catches the first serious light. For a few minutes the house is all preparation and no display. No one is yet properly dressed for judgment, no caller has arrived, no remark has been made at table, no smile has been required. The women of the house, high and low alike, are still closest to themselves in this narrow stretch of time, though only some of them have the leisure to notice it. By the time you descend toward breakfast, the day has taken on its first layer of ceremony. The air changes with the staircase. Carpets soften the sound beneath your feet. The hall reflects a diluted morning shine from polished wood and framed glass. Somewhere a clock offers the hour as though hours belonged equally to everyone, which they do not. If you are a daughter in a household that expects refinement, breakfast is not merely the first meal. It is the first public scene, and therefore a test so ordinary that no one admits it as one. The breakfast room already smells of tea and toast and eggs, and the faint mineral tang of cooling silver. The curtains are more open here. Light rests on the tablecloth and the rims of cups. A newspaper lies unfolded where a man has placed it, or is holding it, or will lay it down with enough deliberation to suggest that the morning's important thoughts travel naturally through it. The men of the house often arrive at table bearing the authority of the outside world before they have even stepped into it. They bring with them headlines, money, parliament, railways, law, schedules, business, and the easy assumption that history is a thing made elsewhere and by them. The women arrive bearing a different set of obligations. Tone, harmony, modesty, pleasantness, evidence that the home is running as it should. You take your place and become immediately aware of how much a body can communicate before it has said anything at all. A lowered gaze can mean grace or uncertainty depending on who is reading it. A bright tone can sound charming or overeager. Appetite must be trimmed into elegance. Hunger, like ambition, is safer when not announced too clearly. So you take toast, perhaps an egg, perhaps nothing that requires too much cutting or too much attention. You thank the servant. You do not reach before an elder or before a man unless the house is unusually relaxed, which respectable Victorian houses often are not. You stir your tea. You let the spoon rest without clatter. You chew as though your body has been instructed in manners deeper than instinct. Conversation may move around you or include you, but it rarely forgets the invisible borderlines around a woman's voice. In some homes, fathers enjoy hearing their daughters say something clever so long as it does not sound too assured. In others, the breakfast table is no place for female opinion except in the most decorative form. A remark about weather is safe. A remark about flowers is safe. A remark about the quality of the marmalade might even be amusing if delivered gently. But law, politics, money, science, reform, philosophy, foreign affairs, and the sharper edges of belief are dangerous ground unless you have mastered the art of touching them without appearing to step there. A woman may know many things. She must often wear that knowledge like lace, not armor. Meanwhile, every plate placed on the table has already passed through hands not invited to sit there. The butter has been fetched, the kettle filled, the cloth laid, the fire kept alive, the crumbs from yesterday swept below stairs, Someone may be swallowing her own tea in 3 hurried mouthfuls before the bell calls again. The contrast is rarely named, which is one of the reasons it remains so effective. Gentility depends upon making work disappear just before it becomes visible enough to look like work. You learn quickly that breakfast establishes the weather of the day. A father in good spirits softens a room. A husband in silence makes every cup sound louder. A sharp glance from a mother can linger in the mind until luncheon. Even the order in which chairs are pushed back seems to matter. When the men rise first, as they often do, their departure leaves behind a curious afterimage, as though authority has gone off to conduct the nation, while decorum remains behind to supervise the crumbs. The women stay a little longer. There are second pours of tea, little comments, corrections disguised as care. The true domestic day has only just begun. And because one world is never enough in this story, turn again and look beneath the floorboards of the same morning. The servant who poured your tea has not eaten in peace. She has balanced a tray, carried a dish too hot for comfort, and retreated to the kitchen where the remains of breakfast are no longer symbols of refinement, but practical matter. A scrap of toast, tea gone strong and lukewarm, a heel of bread, a standing meal, if that. She cannot sit in the dining room, and in some houses, she must not even be seen eating a passage. Her body is expected to perform labor without drawing attention to its human needs. If the lady upstairs must hide hunger for the sake of refinement, the maid downstairs must hide it for the sake of discipline. There is a form of invisibility peculiar to domestic service. You are noticed most when something goes wrong, least when everything is smooth. A well-run breakfast erases the women who made it happen. A dropped cup, a delayed tray, a missing spoon, a plate too cool, and suddenly the whole machinery becomes visible through blame. So you learn to move in advance of need. You anticipate. You listen for bells before they ring. You memorize preferences. Which gentleman takes more sugar? Which child refuses crusts? Which room likes the fire fed early? Which mistress prefers the curtains opened in a particular order? Every household is a country with its own laws, and servants are the ones expected to learn the Constitution by instinct. Back upstairs, breakfast ends, but comfort does not begin. You rise and return to your room or dressing table because the next performance is waiting. Hair? It sounds simple when spoken in one word, but in the Victorian world, hair is biography, morality, class signal, age signal, and social strategy braided together. Hair does not merely sit on the head, it is interpreted. You sit while the maid brushes, or you stand before the mirror if you belong to the wide middle where refinement exists without abundant help. The brush catches first where the night has been least forgiving. It drags through yesterday's set, yesterday's oil, yesterday's pins, yesterday's tiny bargains with fashion. If curls are wanted, hot irons must be heated and tested. If braids are required, partings must be precise. If fullness is lacking, saved strands may be added back in through a discreet little pad made from hair that once fell from your own head and has returned now in the name of volume. The whole business hovers between ingenuity and eeriness, which is true of more than one Victorian habit. The scalp becomes its own little field of endurance. Pins press, combs tug, a section must be redone because one wave refuses to behave. The maid says nothing unless she must. You say nothing because there is no point in admitting that the shape of womanhood can ache before the hour is even respectable. The finished hair must suggest natural order. It must not advertise that it took heat and patience and repetition. This is one of the century's favorite illusions. The more labor something requires from a woman, the more naturally it is expected to appear. If you are unmarried, your hair may be arranged to suggest youth without wildness. If you are married, it may be smoothed into greater gravity. If you are older, you are permitted more authority, but not carelessness. Somewhere always lurks the possibility of looking either too eager or too neglected, and the narrow path between those accusations consumes astonishing amounts of female time. A lock left too loose may be flirtation. A style too severe may be pride. A bonnet chosen poorly may say more than an entire conversation was allowed to say. And there are women for whom hair is not a morning ritual of status, but a practical problem to be solved fast. A shop girl wets her comb and drags it through in a shared mirror. A factory worker binds hers tight because machinery is less forgiving than gossip. A maid twists hers up simply to keep it from falling into soup or soot or milk. Across classes, the head remains public even when the woman herself has almost nowhere private to stand. When at last the pins are set and the final look approved, you glance in the mirror and see a face more finished than free. You have been translated into acceptability once again. There is no applause for this, only silence, which in such households often counts as success. The absence of criticism is one of the soft currencies by which women are paid. Now comes the work that polite society likes to describe as merely keeping house, as though the phrase referred to a mild household breeze and not a complex system of supply, supervision, memory, diplomacy, budgeting, repair, scheduling, repair, and emotional weather control. If you are mistress or daughter in a respectable home, you may not call this labor outright, but the house knows what it is. Every room asks a question, every servant brings one more. Every drawer, cupboard, nursery, pantry, entryway, bill and guest list is part of your daily landscape. The household ledger waits on the desk. It is less romantic than a diary, and often more revealing. Coal, candles, tea, sugar, soap, meat, bread, repairs, wages, linen, starch, shoe leather, broken china, extra milk when children are unwell, fees for the sweep, new ribbon for a bonnet that must not look old too soon, buttons, needles, the countless little consumptions of daily life march in ink lines down the page. A household that appears serene from the street may be held together by a woman doing arithmetic with one ear turned toward the stairs. Servants come and go with questions that are never dramatic in isolation and exhausting in accumulation. The cook wants to know whether fish may be served Friday, though the haddock looks tired. The maid asks whether she may change her half-day because a cousin is to be married. The nurse has noticed a cough in the baby after midnight. The laundered napkins have returned with one edge, not as white as expected. The gardener says the frost caught the early peas. The chimney in the morning room draws badly when the wind shifts. The lamp oil is low. Someone has chipped the basin in the blue bedroom. A footman is borrowing polish too quickly. Nothing here resembles the public importance attached to masculine work. And yet, each small decision protects the family from discomfort, embarrassment, cost, or chaos. You answer gently because harshness marks a woman as unlovely. You answer firmly because hesitation invites repetition. You learn to make management sound like preference and command sound like composure. If you are too warm, standards soften. If you are too sharp, resentment hardens in the kitchen and along the passageways. A house is not governed like a regiment, but do not mistake it for less complex. It has children, illness, weather, appetite, vanity, status, and the constant possibility of guests. It must absorb all of these without ever appearing flustered. The irony is that the better you do this work, the less anyone is likely to call it work. A dinner served at the right moment, a curtain mended before a visitor notices the frayed edge, a husband's shirt button replaced before he reaches for it, a nursery kept warm enough that children remain cheerful, flowers cut before they begin to droop. The feminine ideal praises women most extravagantly when their labor has vanished into atmosphere. You are not supposed to look managerial. You are supposed to look naturally domestic, which is far more demanding. Cross again to another female world, and the household changes shape entirely. In a lodging house, or a working kitchen, or a cramped terrace, where every room earns its keep, there is no illusion that domestic life floats on grace. Pots must be scrubbed because they are dirty, sheets must be washed because they are foul, floors must be swept Because ash gathers, children must be watched. Because there is no nursery into which responsibility can be delegated. A working woman's domestic competence is no less intricate than her wealthier counterparts, but it is measured less in refinement than in survival. Does the fire hold? Is there bread left? Can rent be met? Have the boots dried? Has the baby settled? Can this dress be turned, patched, and made to last another season? Does one cup of tea stretch across the afternoon? A poor woman's household ledger is often kept in the body and in memory, rather than in green leather on a desk. Near midday, the nursery calls, or the schoolroom, and here the Victorian day reveals another of its soft contradictions. The century loved to place women near children, and then distrust them the moment their affection became too visible or too influential. If you are a mother, you are expected to oversee innocence without smothering it, love children without being ruled by them, supervise manners without raising your voice too often, produce sons fit for the world, and daughters fit for gentility, all while making it look like instinct rather than strain. You climb toward the nursery, and the house changes again. The rooms are warmer here, or ought to be. Toys occupy corners. Small garments are folded in ways that suggest both order and constant disturbance. A child's shoe lies under a chair, as though childhood were a tiny storm forever passing through and never quite leaving anything in the right place. If there is a governess, she occupies one of the most peculiar positions in the Victorian order. Educated, respectable, female, paid, dependent, neither family nor servant in the simple sense, always nearby and rarely fully at ease. She teaches the children French, handwriting, geography, scripture, deportment, perhaps music, perhaps drawing, perhaps Latin, enough to flatter a father's educational ambitions for his son, without alarming anyone with too much female scholarship. You ask how lessons are going. The governess answers with tact, trained by necessity. A child is improving in sums, another remains inattentive with copywork. A little boy refuses his history dates unless bribed by praise. A girl has a quick memory but asks questions in ways that make older relatives uneasy. Such reports are not trivial. They are the first drafts of the family future. The son who looks out the window may later look out over an estate or office. The daughter who learns to lower her eyes at the right moment is learning already how much of her life will depend upon timing. You smooth a curl from a forehead. You ask whether the baby slept. You inspect a pinafore. You listen for that one sound every woman in a household learns to hear even through other thoughts. The odd cough, the unusual cry, the silence that means either peace or danger. If you are a loving mother, you must not appear too indulgent. If you are a practical mother, you must not appear cold. The Victorian ideal leaves women surprisingly little room to simply be human in relation to their children. Everything becomes evidence, and somewhere on the edge of this scene is the nursemaid or the nursery maid, carrying the physical side of care. She lifts, dresses, washes, fetches, rocks, folds, and repeats. A child may cling to her in the night and forget her later in life entirely. Women whose hands are on the body of daily life often disappear fastest from family memory. By now, the sun has climbed higher, at least in theory. In practice, Victorian light often feels filtered through smoke, curtains, and moral restraint. Still, noon arrives, and with it, the sense that the morning has already lasted a full day. This is when letters must be answered. Correspondence, like calling cards, is one of the age's great quiet systems of pressure. Paper travels where bodies cannot. It preserves manners, obligations, refusals, apologies, thanks, charitable duties, family negotiations, and endless small arrangements in ink. You sit at the writing desk and sort envelopes by weight of consequence. A note from an aunt, a charity appeal, an invitation to tea, a letter regarding a subscription or parish matter, a reply expected by Thursday, a visiting card enclosed, perhaps a bill folded so neatly it tries to disguise the fact that it will inconvenience you. You uncork the ink, choose paper, test the nib, and begin to phrase your thoughts in the peculiar half-sincere, half-strategic language of respectable correspondence. Most obliged, delighted, if convenient, regret, honored. With every sentence you are arranging tone as carefully as you arranged your hair. Women in this period were expected to be naturally gracious, which meant they often spent large portions of life manufacturing grace in writing. You decline without seeming offended. You accept without seeming greedy for company. You thank for gifts that are not to your taste. You inquire after health in ways that are caring, but not intrusive. You mention the weather because weather is often safer than truth. The hand cramps, the wrist grows tired, the ink dries slower than your patience. Yet the letters must go, because society depends upon women writing the connective tissue of family life. Below stairs, written words hold a different power. A servant with a reference letter carries more than paper when she seeks a new place. A girl with poor handwriting may be judged before she speaks. A working woman who cannot spare time to answer home may still carry home inside her constantly. Letters from country mothers, absent sisters, sweethearts, brothers at sea, cousins with news of births and burials, all travel through the same mail system as invitations on cream card, but they belong to another emotional country. They are read in corners, folded into aprons, hidden under mattresses, answered by candlelight, if answered at all. From the desk, the day can seem almost manageable for a little while. Ink lines, folded pages, blotting paper, the measured scratch of the pen. There is a sleepy quality to such work when the room is still. It suggests peace, though peace is not quite the same thing as being left alone. Even here, footsteps may interrupt, a maid with a question, a child with a torn cuff, a door opened to announce that luncheon will be served soon, or that Mrs. Somebody has sent a card, or that the laundry has returned. And the laundry deserves its own long breath, because it is one of the places where the entire Victorian dream of cleanliness and order comes closest to collapsing into labor so hard it almost shines with honesty. If you are the woman who oversees laundry, you inspect whiteness, starch, mending, and the integrity of delicate trim. If you are the woman who does the washing, you know the work from the inside, and nothing about it feels decorative. Imagine the washhouse or yard, steam already hanging thick in the air, tubs filled and refilled, soap biting where skin is broken, linen grown absurdly heavy with water, sheets that seem to gain weight just to mock the human back, shirts, chemises, petticoats, aprons, cloths, stockings, collars, cuffs, diapers, table linen, towels, curtains perhaps. Respectability is fabric intensive. Someone must bear that fact in the arms. A laundress bends, lifts, twists, rubs, wrings, and repeats until the rhythm enters her muscles like a second heartbeat. Water runs over her wrists and down into shoes that were not dry to begin with. Lye roughens the hands. Steam blurs the air. There is a particular fatigue that comes from being warm in the face and cold in the feet at the same time. The body never quite knows which misery to answer first. And still, there is starch to prepare, collars to stiffen, cuffs to smooth, irons to heat, scorch marks to avoid, seams to press flat enough that someone else may later look immaculate in public and attribute the effect to breeding. Laundry is intimate in a way drawing room life pretends not to be. Clothes remember the body more honestly than conversation does. A cuff tells you how a man moves his hand. A hem tells you the weather of a woman's root. A child's garment tells you whether play was permitted or merely escaped into. A stained pillowcase may hint at illness, tears, cosmetics, fever, grief, or simple heat. The women who wash and press do not need invitations to understand a household. It arrives bundled before them each week. They are trusted with evidence and expected to return only purity. Sometimes little things emerge from pockets, a coin, a scrap, A note blurred beyond use, a button, a ribbon, a dried flower. Servants and working women are often presumed morally fragile by the classes who depend upon them most heavily. Yet the very structure of domestic life hands them endless opportunities to know the private untidiness of the respectable. The discipline of not speaking becomes another form of service. When the bundles return upstairs, whiteness restored as much as possible. The lady of the house may inspect them with the expression of someone evaluating standards, not bodies. But each clean napkin has a history. Each pressed sleeve has cost someone something. The Victorian home is full of these invisible exchanges. Comfort bought with effort that must not leave fingerprints. Shortly after noon or early in the afternoon, the social world begins tapping at the door again in miniature. A tray appears. Upon it lies a card, perhaps just one, perhaps several. The card is small enough to hide under a teacup and powerful enough to alter the next week. It says a name, and behind that name stands a web of obligation. Calls made, calls returned, calls delayed, calls strategically ignored. Society in this period is less a circle than a carefully tended ledger of appearances. To receive a card properly is a ritual. You glance, you register. You decide, are you at home in the social sense, even if you are physically home? Are you able to receive? Are you willing? Is this woman someone to encourage, endure, outmaneuver, or gently cool? A respectable lady's afternoon can vanish into these tiny rectangles of cream paper and the implications folded into their corners. A turn of the card can signify a personal call. A husband's name may be included. A style too ornate suggests vulgarity. A card too plain may suggest indifference or economy. And economy itself can be socially loud. If the caller is admitted, then the drawing room becomes a polite theater at once. You are arranged once more on upholstery. Tea may be summoned. Hands are kept still. Voices remain low enough to flatter the room. Yet beneath that mild surface, all kinds of information move. Who has gone to the seaside? Whose daughter is looking pale? Which son has inherited unexpectedly? Who is behind on returns of civility? Which family has hired a French governess, and whether that should be admired or feared? Which sermon was too long? Which charity event was well attended? The exchange is never supposed to look hungry, but it is full of appetite of one kind or another. Women in these drawing rooms often exercise their sharpest powers under the most delicate covers. A compliment can be a probe. A question about health can be a census of weakness. A remark about curtains can be a judgment on taste, and therefore on breeding, money, and judgment all at once. If you are clever, you learn to float through such conversation without gripping it too hard. If you are tired, it can feel like walking over glass disguised as carpet. And yet, there is also companionship here, though it comes mixed with surveillance. Women share information because information is one of the few social instruments reliably placed in their hands. They map one another's households, children, moods, illnesses, and prospects. They are not merely idle, they are sustaining a soft infrastructure of social power. The century pretends is trivial precisely because women have become so skilled at it. When the caller finally leaves, taking her perfume and opinions with her, the room seems deeper for a moment. You exhale, the cushion beneath you remembers your posture longer than your mind wishes to remember the conversation. Perhaps you ring for fresh tea. Perhaps you stand at the window for 1 minute and let your face rest out of expression entirely. This is one of the day's necessary little returns to safety. Not full freedom, simply a brief interval in which no one is currently measuring your words. Of course, if you are obliged to make calls rather than receive them, the strain unfolds in another key. You dress for the street, not in the brisk practical way a working woman dresses for errands, but in the ceremonial manner of one whose outing is itself a message. Gloves must be suitable, bonnet correct, skirt not catching, boots clean, card case prepared. You step into a carriage if the household keeps one, or into a hired conveyance, or onto a carefully chosen route, and the day outside becomes a sequence of entrances and refusals. The ideal call is brief and almost bloodless. You are shown in, seated, offered tea you do not want, and expected to produce exactly enough warmth to prove good breeding without ever seeming starved for company. 15 minutes can contain an astonishing amount of self-control. One must ask after health without dwelling on illness, mention family without sounding boastful, accept hospitality without settling in, and leave before one becomes tiresome. The whole enterprise has the energy of a ritual duel fought with compliments. Sometimes the person is not at home, and this is nearly a relief. You leave your card, perhaps exchange a word with a servant at the door, and continue. The call is performed, the obligation logged, the social machine satisfied. But when people are at home and receiving and curious, one draws upon reserves of poise that might have been better spent elsewhere. The carriage between houses becomes a little floating chamber of recovery. You settle your skirt, rest your hand on the card case, glance at the street sliding by. Outside, clerks, porters, costermongers, nurses, apprentices, flower sellers, errand boys, and washerwomen conduct their own afternoons with no interest at all in the exact angle of your smile. That contrast can feel almost medicinal, and still, even in the carriage, you are not alone with yourself. Glass reflects you, streets observe, the very city participates in the making of a Victorian lady by offering her no truly anonymous passage. She may be protected by class, shielded by conveyance, softened by gloves, but she is also displayed by all of it. When the house has been navigated and society has taken its bite from the afternoon, another quieter ritual begins. Needlework, mending, embroidery, the forms vary, but the deeper purpose remains astonishingly stable. A woman with a piece of sewing in her hands appears industrious, modest, useful, calm, and pleasantly occupied. This is not a small thing in a culture suspicious of female idleness and equally suspicious of female intensity. Needlework offers the perfect middle ground. It keeps the hands busy and the mind disguised. You settle in a chair near the best light. The basket opens. Colored thread, scissors, patterns, stockings requiring darning, a child's hem needing attention, an unfinished sampler, perhaps some decorative work not urgently needed by anyone but useful as evidence that your gentleness can produce beauty. The first few movements of the needle always feel purposeful. In and out, pull through, smooth the fabric, adjust the hoop. After a while, the rhythm begins doing something softer to the mind. Thoughts drift on it. The body remains occupied while the inner self loosens slightly. In company, the sewing circle becomes one of the gentlest and most relentless forms of female surveillance ever devised. Women sit with bent heads and lowered voices, and in that posture they say remarkable things. A marriage is discussed, a niece's prospects are weighed, a minister's sermon is judged, a dress is praised with the kind of precision that reveals exactly what was wrong with it. A young woman's reading habits are mentioned. Someone was seen in town unchaperoned for a few minutes too long. Someone's daughter speaks too freely. Someone's son drinks. Someone's maid is left without proper notice. Stitch by stitch, the social fabric is reinforced and punctured at the same time. Yet it would be unfair to call this only cruelty. There is care here too, though it often comes dressed as practicality. A woman asks whether your mother has recovered. Another offers a stronger thread. Someone notices that you seem pale and recommends fresh air or a tonic or less novel reading. Concern in the Victorian world rarely travels naked. It prefers respectable clothing. Sympathy may arrive hidden inside advice, and behind the gentility of decorative sewing lies the harder world of women who stitch for bread. Seamstresses bending under lamplight, milliners finishing trims late into the evening, shirtmakers ruining their eyes on pale cloth. Their work enters the parlors of wealth without their names. They shape fashion more intimately than the women who wear it, and are rewarded with wages that scarcely honor the time. A lady may embroider a flower because it is graceful to do so. A poor seamstress hems 12 cuffs because rent is due. Needlework unites women across class and divides them at the same stroke. When the circle breaks or the task is set aside, the body notices how long it has been still. Knees stiffen, fingers hold a slight memory of the thread. The room has changed color while you sat there. Afternoon is lower now. More golden, more tired. This is often when someone proposes a walk, and the word walk in a Victorian household means many things before it means exercise. You do not simply go out to move the limbs, you go out to restore color, to display steadiness, to satisfy health advice, to let children air themselves, to be seen by neighbors in proper condition, to keep routine from feeling stagnant, to perform the agreeable activity called taking the air, which sounds so simple and in practice contains entire codes of posture and propriety. A promenade in the garden or along a respectable route is less freedom than motion within visible boundaries. You dress again for it, lightly perhaps, but not without thought. Gloves, bonnet, shawl, if the weather hints at chill, a parasol, if the light threatens complexion or expectations require the look. Gravel begins underfoot with a crunch too soft to count as noise and too distinct not to announce your progress. The garden path curves through clipped hedges, rose beds, perhaps a small lawn, perhaps a bench, perhaps a conservatory breathing warm glassy air, if the household is fortunate enough to have one. The world outdoors feels wider than the drawing room and no less observed. Older women notice. The younger women notice each other. Mothers notice everything. The body in motion reveals what a seated body can conceal. Does she carry herself well? Does she walk too fast? Does she seem eager to catch notice? Does she look tired? Does she talk too freely? Does she blush? Does she keep step properly? The whole garden becomes a stage furnished with shrubs and moral consequence. Still, there are tiny pleasures here. A breeze under the bonnet brim, leaves moving, the smell of damp earth after the morning's chill. A rose opened wider than it was yesterday. For a few minutes the lungs feel less supervised, even if the corset disagrees. A child runs ahead and is called back. Gravel shifts beneath the boot in a way carpet never does. The outside world, even in highly managed form, offers a hint of scale larger than upholstery and routine. And somewhere beyond the garden wall or down a street not meant for promenading, other women are also moving through afternoon, but not for display. A factory girl walks home at speed with sore feet and no room for ornamental paws. A vendor trudges with her basket. A charwoman goes to another house. A laundress delivers bundles. A dressmaker carries work wrapped in cloth. Their steps are practical, yet these women too are watched, measured, judged. The difference is only in what their movement is expected to prove. By late afternoon, the house grows quiet in that unmistakable Victorian way, where silence is never empty, but packed with small distant sounds. A clock from the hall, a cup set down in the pantry, a stair creak, a servant moving behind a door, fire settling, light drawing long slant lines across wallpaper and carpet. This is an hour in which a book can enter the room and look like peace, even when the mind holding it is nowhere near peaceful. You take a volume from the table, or from the little shelf where improving books wait with their tidy dignity. Poetry is safest often, essays may be admired, religious reflection is beyond criticism. Novels occupy a more dangerous territory because they make room for feeling, and feeling is always welcome only in measured quantities. A woman who reads too eagerly is at risk of appearing hungry. A woman who cares too much about the wrong pages may begin to ask questions in tones the century dislikes. So you sit with the book correctly, one hand beneath it perhaps, the other touching the edge of the page, your head inclined, your expression thoughtful without sharpness. If anyone enters, they will see the image of cultivated leisure. What they will not see is how often reading becomes another performance of self-command. You turn the page slowly, you absorb a line or two. Then the mind wanders, not wildly, not toward rebellion with banners and speeches, towards something softer and more troublesome, recognition. You notice how tired the day has already made you. You notice how many times you have altered your face to suit a room. You notice that even the pleasant things in a woman's life are often pleasant only when carried in the proper way. A verse about birds or rivers or evening bells suddenly catches on something within you, not because it is scandalous, but because it names longing without permission. Calm ideas are sometimes the deepest ones. They slip into the mind without clamor and remain there. Across the room, perhaps your mother embroiders, perhaps an aunt dozes, perhaps a child practices scales in the distance with melancholy persistence. Perhaps no one speaks at all. The stillness grows thicker, and in that stillness, a woman may become aware of herself in ways daily bustle prevents. It is no wonder the century worried about female nerves. A life so supervised leaves few outlets. Sensation turns inward. Restlessness becomes dizziness. Constraint becomes languor. Thought becomes what people call a mood. This is the hour, too, when the body may begin objecting more audibly to the discipline of the day. The corset that was tolerable at 9 becomes a persuasion at 4. Pins prick where the scalp has grown tender. Boots remind the feet they are not designed for kindness. Shoulders ache from correctness. A room kept modestly warm may feel suddenly airless. A woman is said to have nerves, or a headache, or a tendency to faint. Such diagnoses do important cultural work. They make discomfort legible without allowing it to become an accusation. You sit very still and tell yourself the room is only warm. The line of your stay is only a little too firm. The tea, perhaps too strong or not strong enough. A buzzing behind the eyes. A small lightness in the chest. A sense of floating just slightly outside your own body. Any of these might be named delicately and treated with equal delicacy. A chair drawn nearer the window, salts, a draft, a tonic. Rest, advice not to think too much, advice to walk more, advice to read less, advice to avoid excitement. Women's discomfort in this world is often managed as though it were weather passing through the parlor. There is a dark comedy in how acceptable female faintness can become. Rage is improper, despair is alarming, restlessness is suspicious. But weakness, pale and well handled, may even deepen a woman's aura of femininity, so long as it does not inconvenience marriage prospects too bluntly. The culture allows certain sufferings because they can be arranged attractively. It is one more way the body is taught to speak only in approved dialects. Yet it would be too simple to sneer at the idea of nerves. Many women are genuinely tired, underfed, overlaced, underslept, overmanaged, lonely, pregnant too often, recovering too quickly, breathing rooms full of coal residue, living through grief with no vocabulary but composure. The century's remedies may be absurd, but the exhaustion is real. Sometimes the body asks for collapse, simply because collapse is the only unambiguous pause available. As evening edges nearer, the house begins to gather itself once more. Lamps are readied, candles appear. A tray for tea or a light refreshment may pass through. Children are washed or recollected from governesses. Day clothes are examined for dinner suitability. A music book may be opened in the drawing room, because nothing fills social time quite so respectably as a little performance, provided it remains refined and not theatrical. If you play, you may be summoned to the piano. Music in the Victorian home is another feminine accomplishment that disguises labor beneath grace. You sit straight, smooth the skirt, place the hands, and begin. The instrument is often slightly out of tune from weather or neglect, or the simple fact of being used heavily and cherished sentimentally. Still, it must do. A sentimental song, a hymn arrangement, a piece safely admired by the household. Your fingers move across keys while others listen with varying degrees of sincerity. A mother glows, a father half listens behind a newspaper, or the evening paper now folded differently than the morning one. A sibling waits for a favorite passage. A guest says how charming. You keep time and do not betray that your back is tired or that the bench is not forgiving. Music is one of the few ways respectable women may fill a room without speaking too much. It can be emotional while remaining controlled. It can suggest depth without forcing opinion into words. It can make a house feel cultivated. It can also become another duty, another proof, another way of being observed. The girl who plays beautifully is admired. The girl who plays too passionately risks seeming excessive. The girl who refuses to play appears ungracious. Even beauty arrives with instructions below stairs at the same hour. Sound has another life. Pots, lids, knives, pans, orders, the heavier rhythm of dinner preparation. Servants are entering the most concentrated practical stretch of the day, while their employers enter the most decorative one. Sauces must not split. Vegetables must not overcook. Courses must arrive in order. The dining room fire must behave. Glass must shine. Shoes may yet need brushing. Lamps require trimming. Hot plates travel. Doors swing. Feet hurry. And none of it is supposed to disturb the illusion that dinner simply appears. By the time the family dresses for the evening meal, the house is alive in two incompatible tempos. Upstairs, refinement. Downstairs, velocity. The same women do not live both tempos equally, but the house depends upon them meeting at the dining room door with no visible seam. Dinner itself glows in a more intimate register than breakfast, though not necessarily a kinder one. Candlelight flatters skin, silver, and furniture. The tablecloth seems whiter by evening. Glassware catches tiny flames. Voices lower slightly as though dusk itself has entered the room and requested decorum. If guests are present, the hostess must conduct comfort as if by instinct. If the family dines alone, habit shows more clearly. The husband's favorite chair, the father's predictable complaint, the daughter's careful replies, the son's careless appetite, the mother's watchfulness. Domestic life in the 19th century is built from these small repetitions more than from grand moments. You eat again with moderate grace. Hunger may be greater now, yet still it must appear civilized. Conversation takes on broader topics in some households once dinner begins, but the same boundaries apply. A woman may brighten the table, she must not dominate it. She may reveal knowledge so long as it is wrapped in tact. She may smooth awkwardness, change the subject when someone grows too sharp, rescue a silence, flatter a guest, shield a child, support her husband's mood, and leave the room feeling as though she has worked a full shift in social engineering without anyone calling it such. There are marriages here of every private shape. Some couples have built real companionship beneath the rituals. Their glances are easy. Their small exchanges carry the warmth of practiced trust. Others share a table, and very little else. Politeness has replaced curiosity so thoroughly that the marriage looks calm to strangers and feels hollow to the woman living inside it. Victorian domesticity is often painted in broad moral colors, but most of it unfolds in these subtler tones. Habit, tenderness, fatigue, duty, irritation managed into silence, loneliness disguised as poise. When the meal ends, the public side of the evening begins fading, though not at once. Perhaps there is tea again. Perhaps a final song. Perhaps the women withdraw for a time, if the household follows older conventions, leaving the men to wine and club-like talk elsewhere. Perhaps the family remains together in a softened arrangement of chairs and lamplight. Either way, the body is reaching its limit. A whole day of being carried correctly has weight. Your smile comes slower. Your shoulders know the truth beneath the silk. The fire's warmth grows more seductive the later it becomes, because it suggests a different existence. One in which you might simply sit, and not serve any role at all. Downstairs, the day is not done. This matters while the family eases into evening. Servants begin the long and tie-dyeing hidden beneath gentility. Dishes return, grease cools, table linens are collected, knives counted, trays brought back, floors swept again, fires banked or fed according to rank of room, children's things put away, boots set out for morning, hot water carried, bells answered one last time. The maid who dressed you may now be waiting to undress you after having worked all the hours between. Domestic service folds one woman's fatigue inside another woman's rest. There is a strange tenderness in the late house that belongs to no class entirely. The corridors quiet, the carpets keep secrets, doors shut more softly, candle flames lean when someone passes. The public rooms, for all their importance earlier, begin to look like scenery after a play. Chairs left at angles, a book forgotten on a table, embroidery still in its basket, a teacup not yet removed, evidence that people have been present and performed their parts and are now withdrawing from the stage one by one. At last your own room receives you again. The return feels almost ceremonial in reverse. The body that was constructed in layers must now be dismantled. Gloves off, brooch removed, collar loosened, pins eased from the hair one after another, until the scalp begins thanking the dark. If a maid assists, the intimacy is practical and practiced. If you are alone, the gestures belong wholly to you at last. Either way, there is deep relief in unmaking what morning required. The corset comes away, and your breathing changes instantly. Not dramatically perhaps, but profoundly enough that you feel the difference in the ribs and back, and even in the face. The waist no longer needs to testify. The body is allowed to spread into itself a little. Stockings are changed or loosened. Hair is brushed out until it falls heavier and more honestly around the shoulders. In the mirror, you meet a version of yourself the day has not entirely erased, but has not often allowed either. Tired eyes, marks from stays, a touch of redness where the pins sat too long, a mouth no longer managed for company. These are not shameful things. They are simply the true bill of respectability presented after dark. For some women, this is the quietest hour. For others, it is the loneliest. The house is finally less demanding, and therefore, the mind can hear itself. A wife may realize how little of the day belonged to desire. A daughter may think of futures spoken around her, but not by her. A servant, dismissed to her little room after endless stairs, may sink onto a narrow bed, too tired even to remove every pin. A governess may mend by weak light because no one else will do it for her. The night does not equalize women. It only softens the borders enough for private feeling to emerge. This is why diaries matter, or journals, or little folded pages tucked behind devotional books, or letters begun and not sent in a world that edits women aloud. Writing becomes one of the safest places left in which a mind can arrive without escort. A diary need not contain scandal to be radical. It may say only that you were tired, that the visit bored you, that your child laughed in a way you wish to remember, that the laundress looked cold, that the walk smelled of roses and smoke, that you felt oddly absent while sitting in a room full of people. Such things are small, but history is often built from what people were not supposed to think worth recording. You sit by candlelight with paper open. The flame moves gently whenever you shift. Shadows collect in the corners of the room. Outside, a late carriage passes, distant and hollow over stone. Somewhere, a door closes downstairs. The pen touches the page, and the whole day rearranges itself. Not as society saw it, as you felt it. The breakfast table becomes less about eggs and more about caution. The calling card becomes less about etiquette and more about the ache of smiling on command. The book in the afternoon becomes less about poetry and more about the single line that followed you even after you closed it. Private writing lets the hidden life of a day survive its polished surface. Perhaps you write very little. Many women did. A sentence, a phrase, weather and visitors, and one real feeling disguised between them. Perhaps you write at length because the page is the only place that permits that scale of inwardness. Perhaps you describe nothing and simply let the pen move until the mind feels less crowded. It does not matter. The important thing is the existence of a room within the room. A corner of self, not fully translated for others. Elsewhere tonight, other women are also arriving at themselves through exhaustion. The servant girl rubbing her feet before sleep, the laundress turning her hands palm upward and seeing the day's work written there in red and white. The governess reading half a page from a borrowed book before candle-cost forces sleep. The mother waking again to a child's cry. The widow folding away black gloves. The dressmaker finishing one more seam under weak light. The girl in the attic listening to rain begin on the roof and feeling, for one blessed minute, that no one can ask anything more of her until morning. Victorian womanhood was never one single life. It was 1,000 structures of pressure laid over the same human need for rest, recognition, softness, and breath. And that, very gently, is the secret the portraits never tell on their own. Seen from a distance, the century can look all polish, propriety, stillness, and lace. But follow the women through a whole day, and the stillness fills with labor. The elegance fills with adjustment. The quiet fills with things swallowed before they became speech. Above stairs and below stairs, women are carrying the century in forms it rarely credits. They carry trays, children, ledgers, conversations, needles, water, reputations, expectations. They carry rooms from dawn to dusk. They carry the burden of being seen and the burden of being unseen, which are not as different as they first appear. Now the candle burns lower, the page before you softens at the edges. The fire in the grate is only a red suggestion beneath ash. Your hair is loose or looser. Your ribs no longer negotiate with the day. The room which asks so much of you by daylight asks less at last. Whatever tomorrow brings has not yet crossed the threshold. No caller can arrive now. No breakfast expression must be managed. No glove chosen. No account balanced. No thread threaded. No smile arranged, so let the diary close, whether full or nearly empty. Let the brush rest. Let the final pin remain in its small dish on the dressing table. Let the house settle around you with all its old familiar sounds receding one by one. A distant stare, a final clink below, the small sigh of cooling metal, the faint movement of curtains against the window. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city continues, but it no longer requires a performance from you tonight. And as you drift towards sleep, imagine for a moment all the women across Victorian Britain lowering themselves into bed almost at once, though they do not know one another and will never meet. In townhouses, in terraces, in farm rooms, in attics, in servant quarters, in nursery cots beside a waking child, in narrow rented rooms above shops, in fine chambers with heavy curtains, in humble ones with drafts under the door. They are arriving at darkness by different roads through the same century. Some are too tired to think. Some are still thinking. Some are praying. Some are mending. Some are already dreaming. Some are listening to the rain. Some are listening to nothing at all. Their names may not all survive. Their days may not have entered official history in neat, confident lines. Yet the world they sustained was real, and it was carried hour by hour through all the ordinary acts that leave the lightest mark and cost the deepest effort. A cup poured, a child dressed, a hem mended, a collar received, a page read, a fire lit, a button sewn, a ledger balanced, a silence endured, a thought written down before sleep claimed it. So let all of it drift now, the breakfast room and the wash house, the bonnet ribbons and the wet sheets, the perfume of parlors and the sharp soap of laundries, the greenhouse ledger and the scullery pail, the embroidery hoop and the iron stove, the garden path and the servant stairs, the drawing room poetry, on the late-night diary line. Let them move farther away, softer and softer, until they belong not to effort now, but to memory. The day does not close with a clang. It folds, it settles, it dims like candlelight on wallpaper, and you, unlike the women who have accompanied you through it, may rest without first asking permission from the century. That is a quiet blessing. Keep it, breathe easily, let the old house darken. Let the coals sink, let the clocks grow far away, let history become a hush at the edge of sleep, where the women of this long-vanished day remain for a little while longer, not posed in portraits, not corrected by etiquette, but simply present and slowly, softly, finally at rest.